irrelevant: race and gender. And that's it. But wait a second, you ask. Isn't that insulting? Isn't it wrong? Isn't it probably illegal? Yes, it is all three of those things. But no one's pushing back against it, so Biden is doing it. The problem is that all three of the people we just told you about might wind up in the end hurting the Biden campaign. They're just too unimpressive to run. Biden's handlers seem to have figured this out. Above all, the Democratic Party wants to win this year. They're not in it for sentimental reasons or for love of Joe Biden. They're in it for the power, and they want it badly. So today, the odds seem to shift dramatically in another direction, away from Karen Bass and Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams, and towards someone you have seen before. That would be former National Security Advisor Susan Rice. As of right now, Susan Rice appears to be in the lead for the VP slot. That's an interesting development. Say what you will about Susan Rice, and we're about to, but she is not a buffoon. Susan Rice is smart. She is hard-eyed. She is experienced. Susan Rice knows exactly what she wants, and she understands the system well enough to get it. She is a threat. So what exactly does Susan Rice believe? Well, in a sentence, Susan Rice believes what everyone else in permanent Washington believes, because above all, Rice is a product of D.C. She grew up there. So to our political class, Rice is the opposite of an outsider. She's the home team. Like almost everyone in Washington, she is above all a fervent neocon. As a member of Obama's cabinet, she pushed for the counterproductive killing of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. She has never apologized for that. She should. Then in the Clinton administration, she supported the bombing of a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. And needless to say, it goes without saying, really, Rice led the chorus of liars who claimed that Donald Trump was secretly a Russian agent.
He's taken a series of steps that had Vladimir Putin dictated them, he couldn't have mirrored more effectively. What his motivations are, I think, is a legitimate question, one that I trust that the special counsel is investigating. But the policies that this president has pursued globally have served Vladimir Putin's interests in dividing the West, undermining democracy.
Does that mean you think it's an open question whether or not he's compromised by Russia?
George, I don't know what his motivations are. I think that's a legitimate question.
Now, to be perfectly clear, this is not someone who's just throwing words out. This is someone who's highly sophisticated in the nuances of foreign policy. In other words, Susan Rice knew perfectly well when she said what you just heard that it was false. She knew that much of this administration's actual agenda, from arming Ukraine to expanding domestic energy production here in the U.S., hurt Russian interests badly. And yet Rice didn't acknowledge that. Instead, she smeared the president as a Kremlin pawn. In fact, what Rice objected to were Trump's foreign policy views which, not incidentally, the majority of Americans say they support. It turns out that only people in Washington, like Susan Rice, want more pointless wars around the world because they're the ones who profit from them. Most normal people don't want more pointless wars because they're the ones who fight them. But Rice doesn't care either way. Watch her reaction to the administration's plan to remove troops from Syria.
I woke up this morning to hear that news, and as I do, it seems like 6 days a week, I just put my head in my hands. This is bat crazy.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. It's almost unbelievable. It's crazy to bring troops home from a country that we have no strategic interest in, who are there to fulfill a mission we can't articulate. That's crazy. But that's a consensus view in Washington. When the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was destroyed in 2012, Rice herself said something that was actually crazy. She blamed that attack on an online video. Once again, Rice knew when she said it, it wasn't true, but she said it anyway.
What sparked the recent violence was the airing on the internet of a very hateful, very offensive video. It began spontaneously in Benghazi as a reaction to what had transpired some hours earlier in Cairo, where, of course, as you know, there was a violent protest outside of our embassy sparked by this hateful video. What happened in Benghazi was, in fact, initially a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired hours before in Cairo. What happened this week in Cairo, in Benghazi, and many other parts of the region
Tunisia, Khartoum,
was a result a direct result of a heinous and offensive video.
It was heinous, it was offensive, it was hateful. This video which dared criticize radical Islam. People saw this, they were so offended that they justifiably rose up and started shooting Americans. That was the implication of what she said. But Rice knew that was a lie when she said it. She knew the attack in Benghazi was not spontaneous. It wasn't based in outrage, and it was not staged in response to that or any other video. She knew that because her own intelligence reports made it perfectly clear. But it was an election year, and Rice said what she had to say. By the way, the man who actually made the video, the heinous, offensive, hateful video, was a Coptic Christian. He was arrested after Rice's appearances on television. He was jailed without bail. It was a purely political prosecution of the kind the rest of us reassure ourselves doesn't happen in this country, but unfortunately sometimes does. Whatever happened to that man? No one checked. We did today. 4 years later, he was living in a homeless shelter. His life was completely destroyed. Susan Rice has never apologized to him, doesn't appear to have even looked back. That's a moral crime. Has Rice committed legal crimes? U.S. Attorney John Durham is looking into that right now, and of course we'll bring you the results of that investigation when they finally appear. We're still waiting. We do know, though, that Rice monitored conversations that Trump advisors were having with foreign officials and then requested the unmasking of those advisors. Rice was asked about this in a television interview, and here's how she responded.
During the transition after President Trump had been elected, that he and the people around him may have been caught up in surveillance of foreign individuals and that their identities may have been disclosed. Do you know anything about this?
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Yunus on that count today.
Here's just a pro tip in case you're watching these interviews at home. When a political figure laughs in a way that suggests not real mirth, but nervousness in the middle of an answer, that's a tell. That means they're lying. And in fact, she was lying in that interview. We know that for certain. The other thing we know for certain is that Susan Rice will say whatever she thinks it takes. So it's not surprising that Joe Biden is considering her tonight, and once again, he definitely is. Justin Haskins is a research fellow at the Heartland Institute. We're happy to have him on with us tonight. Justin, thanks so much for joining us. So I just want to repeat for the third time, I think Susan Rice is someone we ought to take seriously. She's not stupid. She's not writing porn novels. She's not pretending to be the governor of Georgia. She's a serious person, and she's got a long record. You've looked at it. Tell us what you've learned from it.
Yeah, the amazing thing about Susan Rice is that no matter how long you look at her record, and I've looked at it all day, you can't actually find anything about domestic policy. What does Susan Rice believe about the Green New Deal? What does Susan Rice believe about single-payer health care? What does Susan Rice believe about a whole host of other domestic issues? We don't know. The only thing we know about Susan Rice is what you said in your monologue up to this interview. That's all we know about Susan Rice. She has a very long foreign policy track record, and it's filled with complete and utter failures. Whether it's ISIS, whether it's Benghazi, whether it's a whole host of other issues, the Iran deal, the apology tour that Obama went on, you could go on and on and on. She's never actually achieved anything in foreign policy, and as far as we know, she knows nothing about domestic policy. How is this woman qualified to be Vice President of the United States?
Because she's tough. I think that's, and she knows how the system works, which it turns out matters. I just have to ask you really quickly, she was on the Africa desk at the State Department more than 20 years ago during a lot of upheaval on that continent. How did she do there?
Well, she was on the African desk when Rwanda happened. And in fact, there were the Clinton administration did absolutely nothing while Rwanda was going on. And there are reports from fellow Democrats who say that Susan Rice stood up and tried to politicize the genocide, was concerned that they shouldn't use the word genocide because they were worried about how that might look if they don't actually do anything, and yet they're calling it a genocide. Susan Rice will say whatever it takes to advance Susan Rice. That's what Americans need to understand. If she's chosen Vice President of the United States, or potentially Vice President of the United States, it's going to be all about how she advances her own personal career, not about the good of the American people.
Well, if Biden wins, she'll be in charge, of course. Justin Haskins, thanks so much for coming on tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
So Joe Biden is old now, 70 on election day, but the truth is he's still a hard man. He grew up that way. Biden's from a different time. He's not soft and housebroken like you and me. Biden comes from the old world where men lived by their fists. They threw knockout punches, they asked questions later. They ate what they killed. Joe Biden grew up on Tough Street. It got tougher as you went down. He lived in the last house on the left. Some call Biden the James Dean of Wilmington, a little fast, a little dangerous. When a ruthless gang leader called Corn Pop threatened the citizens of Delaware, Joe Biden put him in his place with a razor. The ladies swooned, but society couldn't handle it. That much testosterone is a threat to the squares in charge. So, like so many daring swashbucklers through history, Biden wound up with a criminal record. Here he is in 2008 explaining one of his many run-ins with the cops.